Melissa.
Hey, Amy.
So today on the show, we had Dr. Emily Levy, and she is kind of a big deal.
Yeah. She's a smart person. She actually went to a lot of universities because she has her doctorate, obviously. She started at Brown University, and then she received her master's degree in special education from Nova University in Florida. And then she completed her doctorate in education.
Awesome. So additionally, she performed a 5-year research study developing an alternative strategy for teaching reading comprehension and won a 5th place Westinghouse Science and Talent Award for the research. She has spoken at national and international conferences on research-based teaching methods.
Dr. Levy serves as the director of EBL Coaching. EBL Tutors offers specific instruction using research-based multisensory techniques similar to tutors at its New Jersey center.
So that is just some pretty impressive work. So let's tune in now to hear what Dr. Levy has to say. Hi, this is Amy.
And Melissa. We are a couple of retired Texas teachers who are CALTs, Certified Academic Language Therapists. We started our own businesses, and now we have a podcast called
The Dyslexia Duo. So join us for our informative podcast, where we'll delve into dyslexia, covering the topics that affect parents, therapists, teachers, practitioners, and anyone who wants to learn more. We'll guide you through everything you need to know, from the first signs to the intricacies of dyslexia curriculum placement and beyond.
This season, we will cover the referral process, what to expect when your child or student is dyslexic, the generational impacts of dyslexia, and how to support those affected.
Come join us. Melissa.
Hey, Amy.
So today we have a special guest with us, and this is Emily Levy. So I'm going to allow you to go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience. We have a very diverse audience of, I'm just going to say everybody at this point, and it's global. We have a lot of different countries that tune in to listen. So go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. First off, thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to be here. My name, as you said, is Dr. Emily Levy. I'm the founder and director of EBL Coaching, which is a one-on-one tutoring program for students who have special education needs, including students with dyslexia, other learning disabilities, ADHD, autism, really all kinds of students with special education needs. And we provide tutoring both in the New York City and New Jersey area in person, and we also provide virtual services worldwide at this point. And we use all research-based multisensory techniques, including the Orton-Gillingham method, that are very much custom tailored to the needs of each student. In terms of my degrees, I received my undergraduate degree from Brown University. I then received my master's degree in special education, as well as my doctorate degree in general education.
Very nice. Very nice.
A wide variety of information that you've gained throughout your life.
Absolutely.
And I also met you at the International Dyslexia Association. So you've really reached out to a wide variety of people yourself, in that you were able to talk to a lot of different people that were at that conference and get to know other experts in the field, and kind of your own family is experts in the field. So could you talk a little bit about your family?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to. I like to say that special education is kind of in my blood. I grew up in the field. My mother was the founder of a school for students with learning disabilities down in South Florida. So I spent so much of my childhood being trained in various approaches to teaching, observing kids, working with teachers. However, I thought I wanted to carve my own path after that experience. I went to Brown University. I then graduated, moved to New York City, and of all things, I did finance for 2 years, which was an interesting learning experience, but I quickly realized it wasn't for me. It wasn't my calling. So I ended up pivoting back. I received as I mentioned, my master's in special education, my doctorate in general education. And then just slowly and organically, I started tutoring students myself who had different types of special education needs all around Manhattan. and then kind of maxed out of my own time. So slowly and organically started to bring other experts, other learning specialists on board, and eventually created what is now EBL Coaching, where we have an amazing team of specialists who specialize in this type of one-on-one instruction.
That's fabulous. And then your dad?
Yeah, so my parents are also in the field, actually, as is my brother. So it really is sort of a family affair. But my mother, of course, had that solid foundation, as I mentioned before, in having this school for many years for students with learning disabilities. My dad was actually a medical doctor. And when he retired, he really developed this passion for early screening of young kids who may potentially have learning challenges or really need that early reading support. So he's been working on developing an early screener. And then he, along with my mom and my brother, have developed a reading software program to help kids develop their foundational reading skills.
That's incredible, because we know early intervention is so important. And it is one of those things that I feel like is so lacking in schools, is helping teachers understand what they need to look for that early identification piece. And not only teachers, but administrators too in schools are still struggling and wrestling with what that looks like. So that's wonderful.
Very important. Thank you.
I have to think that your Thanksgiving with your family would have been an interesting setting to listen to everybody.
Always is. On many different topics, but including education.
And now, isn't your daughter also going down the same path?
Yeah, so my daughter is my oldest daughter, actually 4 daughters. My oldest daughter is 16, just turned 16, and she has been working with me. She actually came to the conference where we met. She and I are actually developing a writing program. It's a writing software program that uses a structured, systematic, multisensory approach to help students develop their writing skills. So we've sort of developed it together, which has been this great mother-daughter bonding experience. And she's done a lot of the research, testing it on kids. So that's been really exciting too. So she may be have a future in the field as well.
Wow. That's
Wow.
really
It's
amazing.
very
Yeah.
cool.
That
Family
is really
affair.
cool.
Yes, absolutely.
So jumping into some of the questions we had for you, utilizing what you know and all your expertise and all the history in your family, how would you define dyslexia?
I would define dyslexia as a language-based learning disability that affects one's ability to read accurately and fluently.
Very succinct. And as far as that's concerned, when you work with kids and you identify those needs that they have and you start working with them, what do you notice is one of the first things that kind of comes up to the average range or is more capable of being remediated?
So oftentimes we'll see kids who really struggle with decoding basic words. They struggle to read words fluently. They struggle with spelling. They struggle to express their thoughts on paper when writing. These are a lot of these early challenges that we notice, but we find that when we use the Orton-Gillingham method, we use a real systematic multisensory approach, we're able to see amazing results in terms of being able to remediate these skills.
Yeah, I agree. And that's one of the things that I feel like when I work with my students, the decoding comes along pretty quickly, but then the blending is a challenge. And then after the blending, then it's putting it into sentences. It just is that language structure that they have such a hard time building that foundation to be able to read fluently. But it does come along.
Yeah, for
Takes a
sure.
little bit of time.
Takes some time. So we hear a lot about dyslexia and ADHD, and I've even heard the comorbidity could be as much as 40% or greater with that comorbidity between dyslexia and ADHD, and it impairs their executive functioning. So for our listeners who may not know, let's first of all define what is executive functioning.
Sure. So executive functioning is kind of the management system of the brain. It involves skills like planning, organization, time management, task initiation, all of these key skills that affect almost every aspect of school and really life in general.
Yeah. So what could indicate a deficit in the executive functioning from little kids to even adults? Because we walk the walk in our household. I have 3 adult children and 2 of them are ADHD.
Well, first off, of course, it doesn't just affect kids, it affects all ages of individuals. And oftentimes, signs might include things like losing belongings,
Yeah.
showing up late, being disorganized, having trouble multitasking. These are all signs that could indicate challenges with executive functioning.
Yeah.
So, as far as the executive function and ADHD are concerned, I've noticed I did a little bit of research on my own to prepare for the show, and I noticed that they had indicated that 89% of children with ADHD exhibit some form of an executive function deficit.
Mm-hmm.
So, the highest one being the 62% impaired working memory. I found that really fascinating because working memory is such a key component for successful acquisition of new learning. So can you talk to me a little bit about that working memory piece and what you've done or what you've noticed in your career that really can maybe help support that working memory deficit?
Yeah, so working memory is really the ability to kind of hold and manipulate information in the brain. And it is a big component of executive functioning skills and a big component of success in school. So it involves things like being able to remember steps in solving a multi-step math problem and then applying those steps, or breaking down a word problems. Or it might be reading a passage and remembering that information and then having to write a written response about it. All of these kinds of skills involve working memory. So we find that if we teach students strategies to develop each of these skills, in turn, it helps their working memory, helps their executive functioning skills, and ultimately helps their performance in school.
So is that with or without medication? As far as, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole about medication per se. However, as far as people who are out there with kids that have ADHD that are being treated for ADHD, do you see improvement in their child if they are being treated versus not being treated for their ADHD?
I think it really depends on the child. I think for extreme cases of ADHD, extreme inability to stay focused, I think that medication can really help and can help students absorb those new strategies. With that said, we work with many students who are not on medication and who, when they receive the right strategies and support and are given the opportunity to practice and apply those strategies, really make drastic improvements even without medication. So I think it's really an individual situation as to whether medication makes sense or not.
That's a really comforting thing to hear. I know a lot of parents grapple with deciding whether or not they're going to put their child on medication. And I think that that's good information to have to be able to help them make that decision.
So it's interesting. I mean, you heard me talk about my adult children. None of them have dyslexia, but they have ADHD, which when they were younger presented as if it was a learning difficulty, right? Because they couldn't get things done. They couldn't turn in things on time. When you question them about what they were doing or what they were supposed to be doing, it's almost like they had no concept that they were even in math class that day, all of those things. And in reflecting, and in fact, my youngest is 22. She took a little time off from school before she went back into college. And she has finals coming up this next week. And what was it, Saturday? Last night, I walked into her room. She's studying. And I was like, what the Sam Hill? That's amazing. And, I was just so impressed. And then my other child, who is also an adult, he was begging me. He goes, I don't think I can function without going back on ADHD medicine. So I have one who's doing well without it and another one who's saying, I think I really need it.
And that goes back to, it's all about the individual and what their specific needs are.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So that was my little aside. I was just thinking about it while you were talking. So one of the things I had noticed that when I had students in therapy is that if they had ADHD tendencies, remediation could take a little longer because, we have this expected path that we think that they should go down, but we know they exist on a spectrum. And everybody's going to go through that path of remediation in a different way. But my students with ADHD, it takes longer and more repetitions. And I'm being very simple when I talk about this, to go from short term to long term for that easy retrieval. And so some of that is that working memory and executive functioning and everything like that, correct?
Absolutely. Definitely plays a role.
Okay.
Do you find that those are more difficult to remediate when they have that ADHD, dyslexia, one of those executive function deficits and dyslexia? Do you feel like that's a more difficult remediation? Because I have these students who sometimes it seems to take a really long time to get them remediated.
And I think the real answer is it depends. It depends on the severity of the dyslexia, the severity of the executive functioning deficits, how frequently we're meeting with the student, whether they're practicing at home. So I think there's a lot of variables that come into play. I think in general, when we have more than one area that we need to remediate, naturally there's more involved, and oftentimes it does take longer. But not necessarily. Some kids pick up on those strategies at a faster pace and they're able to progress, more quickly than others. So it's all individualized based on how each student responds.
And progress is progress. That's always how I look at it. Yes. As fast as we can, as slow as we need to, right?
That's true. And you have to look at progress in a very individualized way, because somebody might go from reading 2 words a minute one day to reading 5 words a minute next week. That's still progress.
It's still progress. Absolutely. So you heard me address executive function and working memory, but do they work together, or are they separate entities? They are separate entities, but do they work together? Do they clash? Is it a big fight? I mean, how does it work exactly?
Working memory is kind of part of the umbrella of executive functioning. So it's one element within executive functioning. Sometimes students might only struggle with working memory, but oftentimes they also have difficulty with other aspects of executive functioning. So it's really a matter of identifying what their challenges are and then really working on strategies to help remediate those challenges.
Okay, very good.
What are some strategies that you've used in your career that have helped?
Yeah, so what we find is really effective is teaching students strategies that relate to the specific skill they're having trouble with. Meaning, if they're having difficulty organizing their thoughts on paper when writing, which is related to executive functioning, we will teach them a systematic strategy for how to start by brainstorming their ideas, then how to take that brainstorm web and translate it into an essay or a paragraph or whatever they're working on. And then we'll work on a concrete tool for how to self-check their writing with specific elements that are structure that they need to look for. So that's sort of an example of how it might affect writing. If a student, for instance, is struggling with time management, which is, of course, related to executive functioning, we might teach them a strategy where we may perhaps teach them to estimate how long they think a task might take to complete, whether it's a math worksheet or reading a chapter in a book, and writing down that estimated time and then comparing it to how long it actually takes, the actual time. And we find that in the beginning, when students have difficulty with time management, there's often a big discrepancy between those two times. But as they practice the strategy, draw their attention to it, they start to become more realistic with how long things take to complete. And in turn, their time management skills tend to improve. So we really address the core challenges and the core skills that the students have having difficulty with.
So you talked a little bit about writing. Would graphic organizers help those students who struggle with that using some consistent type of graphic organizer?
Absolutely. We use a lot of graphic organizers when we teach writing, especially when it comes to brainstorming their ideas. A lot of students have so many different ideas, but they just don't know where to start and how to organize those ideas. So graphic organizers are a great way to help them organize their ideas before they begin writing.
Should they have a dependable graphic organizer that they're used to seeing, or do they try out a variety? Because I've heard different things. I've heard let them try a variety, or they find one, they need to stick with it. What's your thoughts on that?
I think sometimes the type of graphic organizer may vary based on what the assignment is, whether it's a compare-contrast assignment versus writing more linear. So I think that we are a little bit more direct in the graphic organizers that we introduce, but then if one isn't working or student isn't connecting with it, then we'll introduce a different one rather than throwing 100 different graphic organizers at them and saying, now you pick which one you like. So we're a little bit more direct and systematic in introducing new tools for students to use.
Awesome. Thank you. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors.
Hi, this is Melissa with Kids First Dyslexia Services. I am excited to share with you my private practice. Kids First Dyslexia Services is a private practice that specializes in dyslexia therapy. Each one-on-one session focuses on instruction specific to your child's needs in a nurturing environment that develops self-esteem, builds confidence, and fosters a sense of accomplishment, resulting in happier kids with higher levels of achievement. We provide a professional, personalized experience, always putting the child first. We value the relationships with both our students and parents because strengthening skills and overcoming hurdles to achieve desired goals and success is a team effort. For more information, please visit www.kidsfirstdyslexia.com. That is www.kidsfirstdyslexia.com.
Hi there. This is Amy Rodenroth, owner of Discovery Dyslexia Services. So tell me if any of these situations are familiar to you. Your dyslexia teacher / therapist has suddenly retired unexpectedly, and you do not have the personnel to fill the space. Or you do not have enough trained teachers or therapists for the number of students who have qualified for dyslexia services, and you need a trained teacher or therapist quickly, like yesterday quickly. Or you need a teacher to provide compensatory services, and you do not have anyone that can provide what's needed. Well, what do? I'm going to tell you what you can do. You can call Discovery Dyslexia Services. Discovery Dyslexia Services can help you with your various dyslexia concerns. We have multiple CALTs who can provide virtual small group therapy. We can also train your teachers in most dyslexia curricula, either virtually or on site. Just let us know how we can help support you. For more information, go to our website at www.discovered.com. Let me spell that for you. DYSCOVEREAD.com. And I know it's a funny name, but we're providing huge services for our dyslexic population. So keep in mind, Discovery Dyslexia Services, covering all your dyslexia needs. Let's return to the show.
Have you ever experienced working with a child with executive functioning deficits alone without ADHD?
It's very rare, I will say.
Okay.
Wow. Okay.
Very rare. Sometimes it comes down to the nuance I find of the evaluator, where some evaluators might just diagnose an executive functioning deficit and others will also diagnose ADHD. But I would say it's very rare that we see significant executive functioning challenges without the ADHD piece.
You know, my son, I've talked about him several times on the show too. He has ADHD, but I see more impairment with his executive functioning as he's gotten older, just recognizing the time. Now that he's almost to 25, he's really remediated a lot of these things on his own, which I think is just that development of that prefrontal cortex. But he struggled so much with not actually doing the work, but getting up and deciding to do the work and thinking it's going to take 15 hours, this, over dramatic. Oh, it's going to take me so long to do this work. And then we would sit there and I would tell him, okay, well, just do 15 minutes. I'll set the timer. We'll just do 15 minutes. And we'd set the timer and he'd get started. And a lot of times he could finish because that initial thought of it's going to take forever, I'm not going to do this, was overcome by just setting a time frame. So I guess what my question to you is that something that that's not as structured as what it sounds like you're doing in your practice, which I think is wonderful. But is there something to that as far as, are you really remediating, kind of like what you were talking about, are you really remediating that executive function by just doing something as simple as that, setting a timer? Are you helping that in that aspect or?
Yeah, absolutely. I think all of these tools, tips, and strategies help in part of the remediation process. And I think sometimes that's part of why individuals with ADHD might procrastinate until really late the night before because they feel so overwhelmed by how long they think something might take that they don't even want to start it. So any kind of little tip and tool like that can absolutely help with the remediation piece.
Okay. And I've even seen some studies that say their dopamine, they need that higher level of dopamine to get started. And that's why they procrastinate, because the dopamine increases.
Oh, that makes sense.
Then they get started and they can do it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they don't have enough to get started on a project that they feel is too difficult.
Well, doesn't that sometimes cause them to shut down also when it gets too close to the deadline of the project. I mean, I've seen kids that they're just like, I don't know what to do, and they just walk off, and it's done. It's a done deal. So I wonder.
I don't know. I think that would be interesting to find out.
Yeah, for sure. We know that ADHD is genetic. I can look at my husband's family tree. I can look at my family tree. My dad was very ADHD. My sister, she doesn't listen, so it's okay. My sister is ADHD. My kids are ADHD. My husband's side of the family is ADHD. My mom, luckily, was very, very structured. And she used to tell the story that dad was always running late for work, always running late. And he's running out the door and he would always forget his lunch. And she'd say, Bob, I packed your lunch. It's back in the 60s. I packed your lunch. Take your lunch with you. And he would forget. And so one day she sat it on the mat on the outside of the door. She goes, he had to step over it and he still forgot it. And it's that whole executive functioning piece. And he's like, I'm sorry, Marianne, I'm sorry. But I think our ADHD people need maybe a non-ADHD person to kind of help them through some of this pieces.
Yeah, it helps. And sometimes they can be part of the remediation too, because they're putting in tips and tools for them as they, live their lives together.
Yeah. I guess everybody needs to go see Dr. Levy.
Yeah, there we go. We all need a Dr. Levy in our lives.
So we've talked a lot today about the academic impact of ADHD, but what about the social and emotional side?
Well, I think it really can unfortunately negatively affect relationships, interpersonal relationships, self-esteem. I think that, when someone's always running late and losing things and forgetting things, it becomes frustrating and can really take a negative toll on relationships. And I think that is something that I hear. We also work with adults sometimes, and many adults will share that with me, that they're struggling with their marriage because of their ADHD. Yeah. So I think by remediating a lot of these challenges, it can really help with one's personal life and self-esteem as well.
That makes sense. So that can have an impact, like somebody who's an adult who wants to go back and get their master's degree or their doctorate degree, and they might struggle with ADHD themselves, might need to go and get some interventions to try to help them get through that process, because they're smart enough, they can definitely do the work, but just those tasks of managing the ADHD, the executive functioning deficits, if they're there, can be a little bit overwhelming.
Absolutely.
I've heard people say, adults say, I used to have ADHD. Okay. So if you were truly identified as a true ADHD profile, you still have residual effects even into adulthood, correct?
Correct. It doesn't go away. You can, again, learn strategies, learn tools for how to cope with it, but it never just goes away.
Yeah. Going back to my dad was like, he was a salesman. So he could talk anybody into, Eskimos buying ice water. Isn't that the saying? He could talk anybody into anything. But organization, he had to make himself sit down, and we couldn't disturb him, when he was trying to work because of his supreme ADHD. And he would also hyper-focus on some things. So what strategies would you implement to assist in both maybe a gen ed classroom and maybe a dyslexia or a SPED classroom to accommodate for dyslexia, ADHD, there's a whole list here, dyslexia, ADHD, executive functioning, or working memory deficits, or all of it?
Well, I think the accommodations are specific to each student, of course, and typically they're outlined in either the student's IEP or their 504 plan. But some common accommodations for ADHD, for instance, might include preferential seating, where the student's able to sit in front of the class. They might have extra time on tests. They might be able to take tests in a different room that's free of distractions. They might receive notes that are printed, so they don't have to try to focus and listen to a teacher giving a lecture and take notes at the same time. So those are some common accommodations that are fairly typical for students who have executive functioning challenges, working memory challenges, ADHD. And then when it comes to dyslexia, again, it depends on the student, but some common accommodations include using a multisensory approach to teaching when possible, including the Orton-Gillingham method, having a lot of teacher modeling, a lot of scaffolding, a lot of repetition built in. So those are some examples of some accommodations that might be really helpful.
Perfect. I think it's great to point out the multisensory piece with the visual, auditory, kinesthetic, tactile, and that Orton Gillingham, the OG, is the approach to that structured support that supports the VACT.
Exactly. Makes such a big difference.
It does. Oh, my goodness. And, that's good for everybody. Let's be honest. That's good for everybody.
Well, I would love to see classroom teachers that weren't necessarily dyslexia interventionists, but regular general education classroom teachers know about the process, know how they could break down steps in a multisensory way to really help the kids understand the general education curriculum a lot better.
Totally agree. I think it would help pretty much everyone.
Absolutely, because this isn't just specific to dyslexia. Anybody could benefit from this type of instruction. Do you feel like if there were somebody who didn't benefit from this instruction, do you have an idea of what that person might be? Like, do you think maybe an advanced learner might find this to be too slow? Or
sometimes I hear that more advanced learners find it to be a little bit mundane, very rote, very repetitive, where they may not necessarily need that amount of repetition. But I think for the majority of kids in a classroom, they would really benefit from this kind of approach.
Especially in writing.
Oh, yes.
Especially in the writing piece. I have a twice exceptional student with a very ADHD, very high IQ. She knows the words once we introduce the concepts. One repetition is all she really needs. But her spelling in writing is out there still.
It's a difficult thing. You work with the kids with dyslexia that are average intelligence, and then you've got the higher functioning ones. And those are difficult to work with too, because you've got to try to implement the instruction to reach them, even though they're at that higher level and need more repetition, but they get bothered by the rote.
Well, she'll say, this is easy. I'm like, okay. Well, it relates. We're getting to the part that it'll make more of an impact where you need it. So we're getting to it.
Yeah. Okay, so you were recognized for a 5-year research study you completed that identified an alternative approach to reading comprehension. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. This was many years ago. I did research on an effective strategy for helping students with learning disabilities to develop stronger reading comprehension skills. And essentially it involved visualizing, which we now know is such an important part of building comprehension skills, but really teaching students how to visualize information and then kind of translate what they're visualizing into kind of a graphic organizer, so extrapolating the information. But the essence was really how important it is to teach students who may not visualize on their own when reading a systematic approach for how to do that. And it really is so effective.
Wow. So can you tell us a tiny bit about what that did look like?
Yeah. So it was a matter of kind of giving students prompts to help them create images of what they were reading, and then asking them questions to develop even more vivid images, and then having them kind of initially sort of draw out the sequence of what they were visualizing from a story that they read, and then having them retell the story using their images. So really using that tool of teaching students how to visualize, getting it on paper, and then having them retell the information in their own words.
Neat.
I would love to see that in action. I have some kids that after they read, like, okay, so tell me, and you're doing the questioning techniques, and it's like, they were just trying to get through the decoding and the fluency piece, and they weren't creating that visual picture in their mind.
Yes.
That's a really neat idea. And these kids love to draw so much.
Yeah.
That would make a lot of sense to them. Although I do have some that I'm thinking they would spend so much time on their details.
So much
for drawing.
detailed oriented kids. Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
Yes. You have to keep an eye on those. Them moving. Yeah.
Well, I could see why you were recognized. That sounds like a really neat idea.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about things that you found throughout your career. What do you find is most helpful for parents that have children identified with dyslexia? How do you recommend parents support their children?
Well, I always believe that parents are their child's best advocate. No matter what, they know their child best. So I always tell parents in the beginning of the school year, meet with your child's teacher, tell them about their child, what has worked for them, what hasn't worked for them, accommodations that work really well. If they have an IEP or a 504, make sure the teacher's aware of that and reads through it before the school year starts. And then have that constant communication. Don't just wait till parent-teacher conferences or till report cards come out, because sometimes that's too late and now we're trying to work backwards. So really just having a lot of communication, being your child's best advocate, and making sure that they're constantly getting the services and the support that they need.
Perfect. And then additionally, what about teachers of students identified with dyslexia? How can they best implement accommodations, modifications? What can they do to help bridge the gap between the curriculum and the child's ability?
I think it's really important for them to take a very close look, a very close read at the child's IEP, 504 plan, identify what the accommodations are, speak to the parent about what has worked, what hasn't worked well in the past. Sometimes past service providers, past teachers can provide really valuable information. So trying to learn as much as possible about what has worked for the child in the past and what they can do to best support the child moving forward.
Because it's going to be different from child to child. What you did with one child isn't necessarily going to work with this other student, even though the disability or the identification of the disability may be the same.
Exactly.
I've had teachers who have said things like, they don't really need that accommodation.
Yeah.
What would you say to a teacher like that?
I would say that's also where the parent can come in, that this is an accommodation that has worked for my child in the past. I know it's worked well. Maybe a past teacher can come in and chime in on how they feel. And there's a reason why it's on there. If it's worked for the child in the past, the parent should really articulate that and make sure that it's implemented moving forward.
Because the parent is ultimately the best advocate for the child.
Yes, always.
Yeah.
And they always know what's best for their child. I mean, they're the ones that know them best. So I shouldn't say they always know what is best. They need to be taught what's best along the way. But they are the ones who know their child best. So,
So
if you had my favorite question, Amy touted this as my favorite question. I don't know if I
because
ever
it
said
ended
that.
up being on every document.
So I like this question.
It
If
is a
you
good one.
had one wish that you could grant for our students, what would it be and why?
I would say I wish that students who have dyslexia and learning challenges would realize that they often have such amazing gifts. It's not all negative. They might have trouble with reading and writing, but oftentimes they're very, very smart. They're very creative. They have great social skills. They're great friends. And these are all skills that can help them be really successful in life. I mean, some of the greatest CEOs and business owners and famous actors and people in Hollywood have dyslexia, ADHD, learning disabilities. And sometimes getting through school is a big challenge. But once they've done that, they have these amazing gifts that can help them to be incredibly successful in life.
Yep, I agree with that.
Absolutely.
So our audience likes it because it was suggested to me. I was like, yeah, this is something we can always ask. This is great. Our audience likes it when our speakers recommend articles, books, websites. What are some of your go-to book titles or articles or websites, or who inspires you to continue what you do?
Sure. Well, some books that I really like are Overcoming Dyslexia by Sally Shaywitz. I think she's an incredible researcher, and that book has so much valuable information. For ADHD, Driven to Distraction by Edward Hallowell and John Rady is a great book. In terms of articles and websites, the Learning Disability Association of America, International Dyslexia Association, great websites. LD Online has some really great articles. CHADD, Children and Adults with ADD, has some great articles and information about ADHD. And then in terms of who inspires me, well, I have to say my mother. A lot of what I know and what I do is from what I learned as a very young child and watching her. Also, Diana King, who is the founder of the Kildonan School, was my mentor.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I spent actually a lot of time. I stayed at her house. I worked at her school. She really was, and she always said her mind. I mean, if she didn't like something, she made it very clear. But she was so brilliant, and she could identify a child with dyslexia in like 1 minute. And I spent a lot of time with her, and she inspired me in many ways. Fortunately, she did pass away a few years ago, but she was an amazing woman, brilliant in the field. And then, there's so many great researchers. Sally Shaywitz is one of them. I love all of this research that's being done on the brain and how dyslexia affects children, adults in so many different ways. So I would say those are some of the people that inspire me.
Oh, I love it. I love that list.
Yeah, Diana King,
she's come up a few times.
That's fascinating that you got to work with her. I'm in awe.
Yeah.
Yeah,
sure. That's really cool.
Very fortunate that I had that opportunity.
You are very. And then I wanted to kind of go back a little bit, talk about your EBL coaching. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you do there and exactly how people would go about finding you?
Sure. Well, first off, our website, which is eblcoaching.com, has a ton of information about us, articles I've written, podcasts, and so forth. Great resource for parents. But basically, we specialize in one-on-one tutoring for kids as young as the preschool level, and we go all the way up through the adult level. We specialize in working with students who have special education needs. Again, dyslexia, learning disabilities, ADHD, autism, speech and language challenges, really the whole gamut. Traumatic brain injury. I mean, we see all kinds of students. And what we do is we always start with an initial evaluation of each student beyond what they may already have, whether it's a neuropsychological evaluation, an IEP. We like to read those as well, but also do our own internal assessment of the student to really gauge their specific needs and what they need the most help with. And then from there, we really come up with a diagnostic and prescriptive plan using the right research-based multisensory techniques that are individualized to their specific needs. And then we do the tutoring either in person at one of our 2 learning centers, New York City, New Jersey. We also go to the students' homes in all areas of New York and New Jersey. And then we do a lot of virtual tutoring now, not just nationwide, but worldwide. We have kids now in Asia and Europe and really all over, which has just been a great way to help so many kids, so many adults who may not have access to this kind of specialized tutoring in their local area. So that's been just really an exciting way to expand our reach and really help so many other individuals than we could before.
Absolutely.
That's wonderful.
Well, thank you for sharing all of your expertise and a little bit more about your tutoring center. I'm excited to hear about that. I did not realize that was up in New York City, and I actually think that is some things that maybe our podcast can help capitalize on, because I know that I've had some people reach out to us here in Texas saying that they have a hard time finding things in New York or around New York. So hopefully that podcast will help get that out there.
Absolutely.
So, happy to help.
Good. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, this was nice, very nice learning experience.
Yeah, it is.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Well, you have a great rest of your Sunday. Thank you so much.
So this is Amy.
And Melissa.
And we're the Dyslexia Duo. See you next time. Bye. The Dyslexia Duo podcast hosts are Amy Rodenroth,
Melissa Dean.
Our producer is Greg Rodenroth.
You can find us on Facebook at The Dyslexia Duo.
Email us any questions or comments at thedyslexiaduo@gmail.com.
Awareness is so important. Share this podcast with your friends,
family,
and teachers.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye.